Welcome to the next installment of Law & Order, the video series where I look at and unpack stories from games. In this one, we'll be looking at Fobia sent Dinfna Hotel. There will be spoilers in this one, given that it's a fairly recent game, so from here on out you've been warned. While starting out really promising with great graphics, solid gameplay, a creepy atmosphere and a story which at least first gripped you and intrigued you as to what was happening, it just became kind of disjointed and didn't really know what direction it was supposed to go in. The ending was, well, underwhelming and it didn't really explain a lot, and as with some of these types of indie horror games, it left more questions than it gave answers, but I'll do my absolute best to try and untangle the story. That's enough intro though, let's jump in. (1960). A famous investigator called Joao Luis is in the town of Trillas in Santa Catarina. Well, when I say in, he's been captured by a group calling themselves the Sagrada Trilla, which translates as the Sacred Trail. Joao, it appears, was arrested on suspicion of espionage. He confiscated his diary and finds out that he is indeed investigating them. Not only that, but he also infiltrated this Sacred Trail, and this cult consider him too dangerous to stay alive. Someone brings him his food as he wakes up, but underneath the bread, a note which simply says, "Run." He collects his diary, then in order to hide and protect what's in it, he hides it behind a wall in one of the cells. He exits the cell area, but is startled and ambushed by a very large thing with a massive left arm, which then chases him. Joao reaches a dead end and tries in vain to get the door open and gets killed. 49 years later, a journalist named Roberto Liche Lopez travels to Trillas after a tip from a lady named Stephanie Freitas. Roberto had contacted her after he read one of her articles on Trillas. Roberto heads there on the 11th of September 2009 to investigate rumours of numerous disappearances and paranormal activity in the town. Stephanie recommended Roberto stay at the St. Dinfna Hotel. He gets there, but Stephanie's contact at the hotel is nowhere to be found. A man emerges from the back office and hands Roberto his key. Roberto tries to get in a few early questions and ask the man about the disappearances, but the man doesn't even acknowledge the question. Roberto makes his way up to room 610, his room, and gets settled. Stephanie is due to meet him there at the hotel, but she doesn't show up. He sends emails to her, but there's absolutely no response. Over the next week, Roberto investigates in the hotel but comes up with absolutely nothing. The only thing he mentions in his email regarding his findings involve a young girl he refers to as the gas mask girl, but this seems to be completely unrelated to what he's been sent there for. Roberto signs off, annoyed that Stephanie didn't even show up, and tells her that she wasted his time. He plans to head home the following day. He runs a shower, but all of a sudden, a strange, what seems to be a portal, opens up on the bathroom wall, followed by a bright white light. Roberto passes out and comes to, and it seems his room has been ransacked. He has been locked in his room and someone is knocking on the door. Trying to find a room key, he receives a very strange camera and a lens from someone who calls themselves E. This camera reveals something very strange indeed. The camera allows Roberto to essentially peer into what appears to be a different time period or a different dimension. At this moment, Roberto hears a noise coming from the bathroom. Another strange portal seems to open, and the bathroom drastically changes, and a young girl wearing a gas mask appears in the bathroom before vanishing again. A door to Roberto's room has been opened, and he makes his way through the 6th floor of the hotel. The camera mysteriously allows Roberto to pass through the walls, which didn't physically exist in an alternate timeline. He gets yet another visit from Gas Mask Girl. Eventually, whilst exploring the floor of the now trashed and destroyed hotel, which of course Roberto considers strange considering he was only unconscious for minutes, hours at most, he receives a phone call from none other than Stephanie. Stephanie is confused and drops a bombshell on Roberto. It's been an entire year and she doesn't know how he's still there at the hotel. She mentions, does he know about this? Is this part of the plan? Confused, Roberto rightly demands answers, but Stephanie seems to be holding her cards close to her chest. She says she has no idea what's going on, but tells Roberto to get to the 1st floor. He sets out for the elevator on the 5th floor, but surprise, surprise, it's broken. He finds a replacement circuit board in the surface closet, fixes it, the door's open, but alas, there is no button for the 1st floor. There is, however, a button for the 7th floor. With no other choice, Roberto goes to 7 and discovers that this floor is markedly different to the other floors below. There are fancy doors with puzzle locks indicating that behind such doors must be something of great worth. With no other route available, Roberto heads upwards. He receives a gun, but nothing can prepare him for what he sees next. Some kind of monster is on the landing, and it's definitely not human. It has a visible heart and obvious weak spot, so Roberto takes aim with his newly acquired handgun and kills the monster. Finds a key for the 6th floor service closet, and inside is the 1st floor elevator button. Not sure why he couldn't have just put the 7th floor elevator button in the 1st floor slot, but anyway, Roberto grabs the button. However, he is being pursued by a huge monster. It's the same monster from 1960, the one that killed Joao Luis. He evades it, making to the elevator and descends to the 1st floor, which of course is inhabited by monsters. Stephanie, true to her word, calls Roberto and tells him that in the 1st floor's library there's a safe with a map featuring the location of room 709, which contains a secret passage leading to the 8th floor. It's not that simple though. He needs a special key to enter this room, and despite solving part of a puzzle cube he found inside the safe, he needs more pieces for it. Roberto obtains an elevator button and heads to the 3rd floor, and not only does he get a shotgun, but he also gets a key for the conference room, which is back down on the 1st floor again. He enters the conference room and has to do battle with a large mutant spider, and after killing it, he finds room 709 behind the fancy doors on the 7th floor. 709 does indeed have a very different lock on it to other rooms. After a lot of back and forth and eventually being chased by the big monster, he manages to get a hold of the key and enters 709. He finds a secret passage and uses a previously acquired attic hook to ascend to the 8th floor. The soft sound of piano carries through this floor. After receiving a key card, Roberto enters the room in which the piano is originating from. But it's not what he expects. The piano is being played by a monster, a rather large, grotesque monster. He fights it and kills it and finally makes it to the statue, beside which Stephanie agreed to meet him. But is she there as promised? Hell no. She's nowhere to be found, but she did leave him a note. She'd escaped into a series of labs underneath the hotel, and that there's this passageway underneath this huge statue. Roberto solves yet more puzzles and finds the passageway. Yet again encounters the gas mask girl, who yet again disappears. Nonetheless, Roberto rides the elevator down into the lab. He figures that this lab must be the source of the monsters in the hotel. He finds a recording of a woman dressed in black entering into an area behind some large doors. Roberto, deducing that this must be Stephanie, sets out to unlock these doors and find out what's behind them. After creating access keycards and pushing various hard-to-reach buttons, as well as being chased again by the large monster from the hotel, he gets the doors open. He's also managed to find out more about the large mutant man from the hotel. His name is Aquiles, and he's the result of an experiment, but we'll discuss this further shortly. Anyway, Roberto found out that Aquiles, like his name suggests, has a weakness. His Achilles heel is a gas named 320, which halts and reverses his mutation, making him weaker. Roberto managed to obtain samples of these gases and put them into the filtration system, hoping that their dispersal would kill or at least slow down Achilles. Achilles arrives, punctual as ever, and it's boss fight time. Roberto fights Achilles, and victorious, he finishes him off, but in the fight, Roberto's gas mask, shielding him from the effects of the gas, breaks and he stumbles towards an exit. However, Roberto stumbles towards a chamber which contains a young girl, this gas mask girl without her signature mask. What is she doing in there? Roberto releases her, but she calls Roberto Dad. Confused, Roberto has a flashback to just before he was knocked out after seeing what he saw in the bathroom. He remembers that he was approached by the young girl, who is still calling him her father, and telling him that this is the only way and that he has to go on without her. Still holding the girl, Roberto is approached by the clerk from the front desk of the hotel, who places the girl's gas mask on her face, and she mysteriously teleports somewhere and disappears. Roberto and the other man are joined by a special guest, and it's Stephanie. She asks the man if anyone has ever made it this far, to which the man responds no, he's the first. The man states that their work can finally begin, and that his goal is to make the dilemma of free will in humanity a distant memory. It can finally be achieved, and that Roberto is the man to help him do it. Stephanie pulls a knife though and stabs the man, but he removes the knife and stabs her in return, killing her. He approaches Roberto and offers him a choice. Now here's where two endings come in. Roberto can choose to team up with the man, helping him to achieve his goal, or Roberto can shoot the man. The man then stabs Roberto to death. Roberto then wakes up back in room 610 again. It's a loop. Confusing, but we'll discuss how that's possible later in this video. So from the very start, the cult called the Sacred Trail is presented to us. But who exactly are they and what are their origins? We get flashbacks in the game that show us some backstory on the Sacred Trail and its prophet Christopher, but I wanted to dedicate them their own section. So way back in 1918, a man known only as Christopher travelled to Santa Catarina. Santa Catarina was an area on which Christopher's family owned land in order to carry out mining work. The locals were delighted as this meant paid employment. This also gave birth to the founding of the village that was to be named Trillas. 2 years later though, tragedy struck. 20 men were buried alive inside the mine after an accident, but their bodies were never recovered. They attempted to find the bodies many times but had no luck. Now pause. It's time for the dark truth. One evening, during an excavation, Christopher's close friend Matthias called to say that they'd found something. Matthias was distracted on this call and mentioned that all of the workers have just disappeared after a bright white flash of light. Matthias tells Christopher that all he sees, all that is left, is a small metal sphere. Christopher tells Matthias not to touch anything and that he'll be there soon. So Christopher arrives and saw the sphere, and he instantly felt its power. Matthias and Christopher fabricated a lie, saying that part of the main tunnel collapsed and that the men are trapped, when in reality something much more mysterious happened to the men. One man, Marcos, who secured the supports in the mine, wrote a letter to his wife saying that he wasn't convinced of the story about the mine collapsing and went to investigate himself. He found the mine completely intact and there was no sign of the men. Heck, even Matthias started to question Christopher's motives in regard to the sphere. Christopher knew of the sphere all along. This letter indicates that he will find it being the sphere. Uncomfortable with the lie they'd fabricated, Matthias realized that Christopher had lied not only to him, but to everyone in terms of what they were excavating in the first place, which they were told was coal. Matthias realized that the sphere had some sort of supernatural power behind it, so he hid parts of the sphere around the village in order to hopefully buy some time to talk some sense into Christopher. Matthias arranged a meeting at the chapel with the other villagers to discuss what had happened in the mine. Before this could happen, Christopher shot Matthias, as he's the only one who really knew of the spheres besides Christopher. Matthias didn't die straight away though, judging from this blood trail. Matthias managed to drag himself to a cabin and was discovered by Marcos on his way to the meeting, whilst the rest of the villagers were waiting in the chapel. Matthias then told Marcos what had happened. Marcos planned to confront Christopher about the mine, as the people in the village had arranged to meet at the chapel to discuss what had happened. None of them would get that chance. Christopher arrived at the meeting and killed everyone. He buried all of the dead villagers, but Christopher had no memory of this happening until after, when he was walking through the village and slowly regained his memories whilst being plagued by visions of the dead villagers. He then entered the mine. As expected, no sign of collapse, no bodies, nothing. But then he comes face to face with the gas mask girl. She accuses Christopher of it all being his fault, and that he never wanted to help him. That Christopher forced whoever it is the girl is talking about to help him. The girl accuses Christopher of ruining everything. The girl says she's going to stop him. Christopher tries to fire his gun and shoot the girl, but this fails. She starts levitating and emits some sort of electrical energy, indicating that she is some kind of anomaly. Christopher manages to capture the girl, and using her power, feeling that he is stronger. Eventually, Christopher decided to build a hotel on the site over the location of the mine, and this birthed the Santa Dinfna, or the St. Dinfna Hotel. He offered shelter to families affected by the mining incident, and this hotel helped the economy as many tourists would stay at this grand hotel. Not long after this, the Sacred Trail was founded by Christopher, and he became their prophet. The goal of the Sacred Trail was to achieve freedom through free will. Christopher was then murdered in 1945. Now enter a man named Davy Menezes. Davy was married, and he and his wife Sarah had a child named Aquiles. Aquiles was really good at sports as a child, even considering pursuing a career as a professional athlete, but as he was growing up, he developed a rare degenerative disease that had an effect on his body and had to stop playing sports, which led to a deep depression. Davy and Aquiles were close, judging by this picture, and desperate to find a cure for his son, Davy knew about the experimental treatments being developed by the Sacred Trail, and Davy agreed to his son Aquiles being used as a test subject for these experiments. There were many test subjects, or guinea pigs, who were abducted by the Sacred Trail. One in particular was the piano-playing monster. According to a memory, this was a renowned pianist called Veruca. Veruca, it's noted, spent hours rehearsing her routine. Not a single note can be missed. She was scheduled to perform, but then was experimented on and turned into this. But it's clear that she retained some of her personality. The other test subjects in question were the monsters strutting around the hotel. These emails from a researcher in the laboratory seem to indicate that the subjects got loose and invaded the hotel, which then explains why they were all there and started attacking the other guests. I'm guessing this is also how the organism grew and started to take over the hotel as well. But back to Aquiles. Over time, Aquiles would become the center of the experiments by the Sacred Trail, and even one of the trail's leading physicians, Bueno, was shocked at the distance Davy was prepared to go to with the treatment of his son. Over the years, the treatments on Aquiles increased his tolerance for pain and increased his strength. In a letter to a loved one, the physician Bueno writes that he's not really comfortable with the madness that Davy is inflicting upon his son. Basically, Aquiles' mental state and his strength started to improve, but Davy wanted them to push even further. Davy's morality warped, and he became obsessed with Aquiles becoming the perfect being. It backfired. Achilles' arm mutated into a giant claw and his skin became tough, so much so that they tried to inject him with something, but the needle broke against his skin. His emotions completely disappeared, and Achilles ended up with no conscience. Bueno mentions a gas named 320, which seems to halt the aggressive mutations and calm Achilles down. This was needed as Achilles' brute strength and aggression was leading to researchers being killed. Bueno states his desire to leave the sacred trail, but mentions he's aware of what the trail will do to people who leave, along with their families. It's not clear what exactly happened to Bueno, but I'd imagine that he died. In fact, it could have been a mass suicide, as a letter from a devoted trail member named Anacleto stated that Davy was no longer in control of the trail, and that in their absence, Achilles would protect Emily. Where were they all going? Well, in the letter by Davy to Christopher, he wrote of his guilt of what he'd turned his son into, and it seemed to be a goodbye, but make of that what you will. At the start of the game, we play as a man who had been imprisoned. The year is 1960, and this man, Joao Luis, is an investigative reporter and has managed to infiltrate the sacred trail until he was caught, and then the trail took his notebook containing all his notes on the trail. Joao manages to escape captivity and is about to leave when he is set upon by Achilles, who, after a brief chase, kills Joao. Much later in the game, playing as Roberto, we find the notebook which was retrieved and hidden away by Joao prior to his death, and it contains some pretty juicy details. Joao was staying at the St. Dinfna Hotel as a guest, and he noticed some things. That people, even 15 years after his apparent death, adored Christopher. They not only called him a prophet, but also their master. Joao wrote down that he needs to investigate and confirm whether or not the sacred trail is responsible for the anomalies found around Trillas. Following day, Joao discovered that the hotel was located and built on top of the coal mine owned and run by Christopher's family. And Joao discovered the story of the coal miners going missing. We of course know that it's because of the discovery of the sphere. Joao considers Christopher's murder being linked to the disappearance of the miners, but who could have done it? He sets himself a next step to talk to a member of the sacred trail. That person? Davy Menezes. The chat went as expected, with Davy evading a lot of Joao's questions, but Joao noticed the way Davy viewed Christopher, as some sort of god, and that he believed Christopher would return to the sacred trail at some point. Joao tried to keep a low profile and kept investigating and exploring, but he eventually found what the trail were hiding underneath the hotel. We saw their experiments, including a young child on a bed covered in open wounds, and recognized their name as a child reported missing the previous year. At some point, Joao was caught and imprisoned by the sacred trail, leading us into the start of the game. Throughout the game, Roberto keeps seeing the young girl dressed in black wearing a gas mask. Judging from this patient chart, Emily's initials show LL for her last name. Seem familiar? Her name is Emily Leche Lopez. That's right, she's Roberto's daughter, but she wasn't born until 2048. This is very confusing. Okay, let's have a look at what happened to Emily. So as we discussed earlier, after Christopher mass murdered the entire village in 1920, he went to the mine. He was confronted by Emily and he tried to shoot her. But it's not until the end of the game when we find out who Emily is and how she ended up the way she did. In the ending in which Roberto teams up with Christopher explained that in 2060, the future, Emily came into contact with one of the Sacred Trail's experiments and became a being capable of producing temporal anomalies and became capable of time travel. Emily appeared and travelled to 1920, 1960, 2009, 2010, and obviously to 2060. I mentioned earlier that Christopher considered Emily too powerful and strong, so he locked her within a tank. But that didn't stop Emily from being able to jump between time frames. The confinement within the tank, apparently, according to this note, intensified the anomaly's interaction with Earth. Anyway, Christopher used and drew from Emily's power with the help of the sphere. Also in this encounter between Emily and Christopher in the mines, Emily accused Christopher of it all being his fault and that he never wanted to help him, and the girl accuses Christopher of ruining everything. We can see what Christopher ruined. Another letter dropped by Emily in the mines is a letter from Roberto to Emily, written in 2060, and it states that even though she hated the work that Roberto and Christopher were doing, that their work on the Universal Transporter is nearly complete, and that afterwards her and Roberto can escape and run away from there. So here's the crack. This might get confusing, and it involves time travel and time loops. Roberto was working with Christopher in the future, in 2060, and Emily came into contact with one of their experiments giving her powers. This letter by Roberto, again from the future, seems to indicate that Emily had fallen into some type of pool, and that's how the catastrophe happened. I'm not sure if anything happened to Roberto in the future, but Emily seemed to be pretty angry towards Christopher. Maybe Roberto died shortly afterwards due to the experiments. In the other ending, where Roberto chooses to shoot Christopher, he goes mad, stabbing Roberto to death and says, "It had to be you, and how did you make the wrong choice?" and then says, "Now I must start all over again." After this happened, Christopher then had to send Emily back to 1960 to kick everything off, and then Roberto then had to arrive at the hotel in 2009. Roberto then gets knocked out and wakes up back in the hotel room in 2010, revealing that everything has been reset. I guess the ending where Roberto dies is a bad ending, as it's an endless loop, and the ending where they team up and travel to 2060 is a less bad ending, or whatever. Now, I wasn't sure what to name this section, but settled on Ambiguity, and you'll soon see why. Here's another question that's been raised after the ending. Lots of RLs were invited to the hotel at the same time as Roberto was, but why? We know that this was in order to go through a long, grueling process of finding Emily's father. But then again, surely if Christopher worked with Roberto in the future and he was capable of time travel with the help of the power of the sphere, he would have known who Emily's father was. So why the long search? Unless, of course, in the original timeline before Emily fell into the pool, Christopher wasn't around because he got killed back in 1945. You see what I mean? Ambiguous as heck. It gets even more ambiguous, don't worry. Christopher says Roberto is the key to everything. But why? Well, we never actually find out. All we see in the ending, in which Roberto trusts Christopher, is Christopher and Roberto walking to what they call the Universal Transporter, which seems to look like an alien ship. And Christopher says that Emily has been, again, sent back to the past to set the exact same events that have just happened in motion again, and to lead Roberto back to that moment again. But why would Christopher need that if he's achieved what he needed to achieve? It makes no sense. Christopher says our future awaits. I'm assuming that Christopher may be trying to prevent Roberto from dying in the future and to stop Emily from coming after Christopher. Maybe Roberto was the key to everything because he was the only one that could fix the Universal Transporter. Again, this is never really explained. We know that Christopher was absolutely terrified of Emily's power. It's obvious by now that Christopher is a colossal piece of crap, and he's of course just wanting to prevent Emily from having her powers so that he can be the all-powerful. This is confirmed through the encoded letter where Christopher states that this technology could never belong to anyone but himself. Hence, it cannot belong to Emily as well. Maybe he wants Roberto to prevent Emily from falling into the pool. The close-up on Christopher's face at the end seems to suggest malicious intent anyway. Maybe he needs multiple Robertos. Maybe he's creating an army of superhuman advanced Robertos in the future. I'm sorry, I'm being petty now. I'll stop. It's honestly a head-scratcher of a story, but I'm sad to say not in a good way. One of the biggest questions I had, however, was this. Why did Stephanie stab Christopher and betray him? This came out of the blue and was completely unexplained. It confuses you further when, if you look in the extras menu, which is essentially the memories or collectibles, after finding an earring, this item gives us a description. It talks of how loyal Stephanie is. It talks of her in accepting to work for Christopher, seeing her chance to make things right. I guess this maybe explains why she stabbed him, but what things was she making right? What was her motive? I'll just go with her wanting to help Emily as she didn't like what Christopher was doing. The truth is that the game never really gives us a direct reason for what Stephanie's intentions were. All we get is a phone call where Stephanie says to Roberto that the girl needs his help, and that the call is interrupted. What we do know is that she was the one luring people to the hotel for various reasons. All these RLs. Structural engineers, doctors, ex-soldiers. What was Roberto's role in her being able to make things right? All we can decipher is that at some point in time between 2009 and 2010, something destroyed the hotel and these creatures appeared in the hotel. All of the RLs were stuck in the hotel and they fought back, barricaded certain floors off, which is why the hotel looks the way it did, and they all died, or at least that's what we can come to assume. Anyway, before Stephanie's death, she says not to trust Christopher, and then if Roberto defies Christopher, he stabs Roberto, and Roberto ends up back in another loop back in 2010. I honestly have no idea. I'd like to think I'm fairly good at deciphering stories, but I think this has been the game to finally break me. Overall, I'll be completely honest and say that I was really disappointed in how this game tied off at the end, after what was a really long, hard slog through the puzzles. I felt it left me with even more questions and didn't really fully answer the ones I initially had. I get having open endings in games that the player can interpret as they like, but I think this one was just way too secretive. So much so that it turned what was a fairly positive gaming experience at the start into a negative one by the end. The game had all this story build up, you choose an ending and then the game just ends. There's no real payoff at all. I feel like the writer of this game had many ideas, decided to shoehorn them all into a plot, but as a result ended up with what was essentially a story full of holes. I tried so hard to work this game out and put some theories into a video, so I do hope, despite this being confusing at times, that this video made at least some of the plot understandable to you. I will leave on a positive note though, and that is that I thought the redeeming factor for this game in terms of its gameplay was the camera mechanic. It was a great addition. But anyway, that's it for this video. If you did enjoy it, then please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support, and leave your thoughts in the comment section below. But for now, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.